Hello everybody. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about my favorite manga series. For starters, I don't have a ranking system on my list. I love all these manga pretty much all equally, except for probably one, which leads to my next thing. I will be making a part 2 to this video because I don't want these videos to be really long. And in my part 2, I will include my favorite manga of all time. So stay tuned for it. Okay, so I'm going to start out this list with Berserk, Vinland Saga, and Monster because I feel like I don't really have to talk about them. They should be pretty obvious that it's in this list. However, if you guys do want me to give my overall thoughts on each one of these manga, leave a comment down below and I will include them on my part 2. But moving on to my proper first manga on this list, we have Holyland. Now, I don't really know how to categorize this manga because it is a fighting manga, but it's not like a sports manga, I would say. It's more like a street fighting, underground fighting type of manga. In this story, we follow this meek boy who is named Yu Kamishiro, and for the majority of his life, he has been bullied. And it reaches to a point where he's like, I don't want to live like this anymore. And he ends up picking up a magazine. In this magazine, it basically teaches him like the proper stance or the proper way to throw a punch. And he practices and studies this religiously to the point where he's throwing thousands and thousands of punches every single day. He ends up running into trouble one night when somebody wants to like pick on him and they end up getting in a fight, and he ends up actually winning this fight, and it grabs the attention of certain people. Later on, he kind of gets this reputation that he like beats gangsters or like thugs, and people start trying to seek out a fight with you so they could kind of boost their own reputation as well. Now this manga has a lot of, I guess, like ingredients or traits for a traditional underdog story, but it really honestly isn't. There are a lot of psychological elements to this, and I love seeing how the story progresses, especially Yu and his character. We see him at the beginning as this very meek and weak boy, and then we see at the end of the manga that he's changed into a different person. I also really like a lot of the topics they explored in this manga, like not wanting to be alone, not wanting to hurt people you care about, scared of failure or losing, and whenever you do lose or fail, what do you do so you can hype yourself and get back on your feet? These are topics that are very relatable, I feel like, to anybody. And it's honestly unfortunate that nobody has picked up this manga. It's been, I don't know how many years, and there's still no official English translation. Somebody, Viz, Kodansha, Yenpress, somebody please pick up this manga. So yeah, anyways, moving on to my next manga on this list, we have Kingdom. And I just want to say that Kingdom is the reason why I love historical fiction. Let me tell you a thing or two about this tale that is Kingdom. So Kingdom is loosely based on the Warring States period, which is one of the longest wars in China's history. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but if that's correct, that would make sense why Kingdom is such a long series. And one of the protagonists in Kingdom is named Shin. He is an orphan due to the continuous war. He has a friend who gets taken to the palace only to return months later on the verge of death, and his friend does end up dying, unfortunately. Shin ends up meeting Sei, who is the king of Jin, and he notices that Sei looks awfully similar to his friend. That's when Sei ends up dropping a bomb and telling Shin that his friend was actually a double and basically like a replacement for him. Shin does not take this news very kindly, but Sei basically tells Shin that his friend's sacrifice was for the greater good. And we see that Sei's and Shin's lives get intertwined because on one part we have Shin who vows to become the greatest general underneath the heavens, and on the other side we have Sei, who is again the king of Qin, and his goal is to unify all of China. I love that we get to see Sei's and Shin's progression over the course of the story. We see them start out as kids, and as time passes, we see them grow up into the young men they want to become into. I also really liked that we don't just get to see Shin's perspective, we see Sei's perspective, we see other generals, other soldiers' perspective, and it would make sense because when there is war, it does not just affect one person, it affects many people. And I really like that the story explores what it means to be a general during war times and what they have to sacrifice, what it means to be in a war. Is there truly a greater cause, and is that worth the sacrifice of hundreds and thousands of people? What it means to be a leader and the weight a leader carries on their shoulders, because if you make a bad call, your people will die. That also actually ties in with betrayals because oftentimes when somebody betrays somebody else, they're viewed in a bad light. And sometimes when you're a leader, you have to make that executive decision in order to minimize casualties or make the best decision for yourself and your people. These are the things that Kingdom brings to the table. It's so epic. I'm pretty sure these topics have been brought up in other forms of media, whether it's a movie or other books, but I really like the way it's displayed and written in Kingdom. Kingdom is honestly one of my favorite mangas ever, but I also think it's one of my favorite stories ever told in any media so far. Moving on to a lighter tone, next up we have Space Brothers. I absolutely love manga that is uplifting, inspiring, motivating, and I feel like I have a soft spot for Space Brothers because one, it's about astronauts and space, but also for another reason that I'm gonna talk about in a bit. Let's talk about the story real quick. And we follow two brothers who one night they're exploring a forest when they end up seeing a UFO. And right there they declare that they will become astronauts. Hibito, the younger brother, says that he will go to the moon, while Muta, the older brother, trying to one up his younger brother, says that he will go to Mars. We fast forward into their lives and we see that as adults, Hibito did keep his promise and became an astronaut, while Muta, he ends up working at a car company. He works there up until he gets fired, and although he hasn't really given up on his dreams on becoming an astronaut, like all things, taking the first step is always the hardest part when you are going into a new path. So his parents and his younger brother Hibito take it upon themselves to send in an application and resume to JAXA, who are currently looking for recruits and trainees so they could become astronauts. A couple of weeks fast forward and we see a letter come to his home saying that he's been approved and that he has passed on to the next stage for the program. And we just follow Muta's journey on becoming an astronaut. We also get to see Hibito's journey becoming an astronaut and after he becomes an astronaut. What I love about this manga is the family support that comes through it. Not only the parents, but the brothers. I did say earlier that Muta wanted to one up his younger brother, but it doesn't come from a malicious place. It's mainly because he feels that because he is the older brother, he has to set a good example for his younger brother. And I feel like any older sibling can relate to that. I also love the people and friends, they make along the way, and how like whenever they meet somebody who just gets them, understands them, kind of like when there's a person who has a friend and they love the same song or same video game or same manga. It's something that excites people and really brings them together, and it's just overall fun. I feel like anybody can also relate to that. There are a lot of ups and downs, but overall the vibes in this manga are great. Next up on this list, I have Attack on Titan. I don't feel like I have to explain what Attack on Titan is. I'm sure everybody knows at this point. If you don't know, you're probably new to the anime manga community. It's okay, you will find out eventually. Or you just don't like that type of story, and that's okay. In all honesty, I actually prefer the anime over the manga. But before I get into the anime, let me just talk about the manga and the story that is Attack on Titan. And basically what it starts off as and what it evolves into 2/3 of the story in, kind of like Eren does. Eren and the story of Attack on Titan start out kind of like your typical shonen. Something happens, it pushes Eren to want to obliterate all Titans. But one thing that was always on my mind when I first started getting into Attack on Titan was why was Eren's story so important? Because him losing a loved one in the grand scheme of things was not that big of a deal. His neighbor could have been equally going through something horrible. So what made Eren so important? Only to later on realize that Eren definitely had a lot more to play than was let on at the beginning, and I would have never in 2,000 years guessed what Isayama was cooking up with this story. Seeing how Eren starts out in the story and what he evolves into is all like cool, interesting, and sad, like all at the same time. And I think there's even like a point in the story where Eren says that he's always been like that. But it was still interesting to see a character basically kind of like turn to what Eren became into. The build-ups and payoffs in this story were truly rewarding. All the build-up that was for the basement. I really wanted to know what was in the basement, but I remember thinking, is all this build-up to the basement truly worth it? Is everything these characters going through, like all these losses, truly worth whatever Eren's dad left in the basement? I was beginning to get worried because I was like, the build-up, it was just like too much at that point, right? And I was like, there's no way the payoff is going to be as equally rewarding as all the buildup that was accumulating at that point. But I was definitely proven wrong. And the payoff was so crazy that I'm pretty sure I wasn't the only one, but many people never would have imagined what was down at that basement. And honestly, I feel like many people, including myself, were just mind blown that Isayama could come up with something like this. Which then leads me to talk about the anime. I said I prefer the anime more than the manga. If there's one criticism I can give the manga is that the art can be very rough at times, and there were times where I couldn't distinguish one character from another. In the beginning of the manga, it does get better over time, but the anime definitely enhanced my experience with Attack on Titan with the visuals, the music, the soundtrack, and the voice actors. When Eren drops the title in volume 22, I remember reading it and thinking, oh damn, because of the context of what's happening at the story at that time. But when I watched the anime, right, and he dropped the title, I was like, oh damn. I was like mind blown again. Because he says it in Japanese, it's not in English. The manga is named Shingeki no Kyojin. If you know, you know. Also, all of the final season, part 1, part 2, part 3, part 1 of 3. I don't even know how many parts there were, but like especially part 1, I felt like even though all the episodes were like 22 to 25 minutes long, they literally felt like they were 5 minutes. It was just like breezed by. Whether you were a manga reader or an anime watcher, Shingeki no Kyojin or Attack on Titan definitely left its mark. It was truly an end of an era, and I'm curious to see what Isayama will bring to us next. Okay, so I'm gonna pause my list right here and I'm gonna continue it on my part 2 video. I won't be releasing my part 2 video this upcoming week. I think next week I'll probably be done with it, so look forward to it. I think my next video is going to be an organized with me video. I finally got my new shelf, so I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.